rights are not quarantined. It's organized by the college as we try to contemplate the impact of COVID and the concomitant things that are implemented by various governments around the world and the impacts on workers and workers' institutions. And don't forget that as we deal with workers' issues and speak to the trade union movement, we've also been doing simultaneously discussions with members of credit unions, and that continues tomorrow. So you look out for another link to another webinar tomorrow at midday, hosted by the college's cooperatives department. So as governments around the world, as we said, have implemented various or variations of the stay-at-home campaigns, it's apparent that this strategy has disproportionately impacted the most vulnerable in our society. And that is evident by the hamper drives, all of the social welfare mechanisms that have been implemented, and not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but across the globe. So there's an admission that some persons are affected negatively by what is happening, and some more so than others, entire communities more so than others. So as we contemplate this new paradigm, in our view, we must be guided by some basic principles. And as the trade union movement, the basic principle that would govern their action and their activity would be the protection of workers' rights, whether those workers are unionized, non-unionized, employed, or unemployed. So today, our discussion, we want to focus on a few key things, and these things will guide the discussion. And of course, as we have our fluid debate back and forth, I'm sure that there are many other issues that can be raised and will be raised. So we want to look at strategies employed by the government to date. We want to look at the impact, both negative and positive, of the changes that have occurred at the workplace during this period. We want to identify whether or not some of those changes could be made permanent. And do we really want to push for some of them to be permanent, or do we think that some of these things ought to just be temporary? What does the movement see as the changes, or in another way, what is the capacity of the trade unions to organize in this new environment, this new normal? How will their capacity be tested as we move forward, with workers now not on the shop floor, not on the factory floor, but at home? How do you mobilize and organize workers in that kind of situation? And we want to know what are the plans, and we'll discuss some plans as these various federations try to craft this new paradigm. So our panel today includes Joseph Remy, President of the Federation of Independent Trade Unions and NGOs, Michael Anisette, General Secretary of the National Trade Union Center and General Secretary of the Caribbean Congress of Labor, and Ozzy Warwick, General Secretary of the Joint Trade Union Movement. So I want to say, good afternoon to you again, gentlemen.
Hi, good afternoon, Comrade Atkins. Good afternoon to the listening and viewing audience.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so what we're going to do is, let me just say what the session will look like. So in the first instance, we're going to ask you, each presenter is going to give a short introduction, just about 7 or 8 minutes. And then after that, we're going to have some discussions arising from what persons have spoken about, in addition to those issues that we've raised. However, in addition to that, we also have a team that is monitoring the YouTube stream. So if there are questions that you have and you'd like to get involved in the discussion, please post those questions in the chat window on the stream on YouTube, and we will pose those questions to our panel. So our speaking order, we will start with Joseph Remy, and then we will move to Michael Anisette, and then end with Ozzy Warwick. As Ozzy has said, he's giving way to the statesmen in the group. So I want to start by giving a brief bio of Joseph Remy, and all of these speakers, their full bios are in the description below the YouTube stream, so you can look at it there as well. So Joseph Remy is the president of the Federation of Independent Trade Unions and NGOs. He is also the president of the board of directors of the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago since 2013. He's the vice president of the board of the Caribbean Confederation of Credit Unions. The CCCU is a regional apex body representing credit unions across 16 Caribbean countries, comprising of 297 credit unions, representing some 2.5 million members. He's a member of the National Productivity Council, appointed as a representative of the trade union movement, and he's also a member of the National Tripartite Advisory Council, NTAC. So with that, comrades and our listening audience, because I'm sure they're more keen to hear you all than to hear me. So with that, I give way, and Comrade Remy, you can begin.
Okay, thanks much, Comrade Atkins, and again, welcome to Comrade Ozzy and to Comrade Anisette. And it really is a pleasure to start this particular series. And again, let me say, I said it at the Credit Union Forum, I am really heartened by the college's intervention in this particular circumstance. And I know Comrade Anisette sits on the board now, and we have had a passionate interest in the role of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies in promoting these kind of discourse and getting more involved in terms of discourse at the national level. So let me say congratulations to Cipriani for a job well done. I think you're on the right path, and I will hope that this will continue as we move on. I would really want to talk about the issues that we have been faced with at present, and I will go through quickly in terms of what is on the screen. And let me say we agree in principle with the statement that workers' rights must not be quarantined during COVID-19. We are saying that against the background that we see when this virus started, so we don't need to go into the whole scenario. What is important in this slide is the government introduction of regulations to the Ministry of Health in early April, which classified essential and non-essential businesses and mandated non-essential businesses to cease operations and mandated social distancing restrictions. And what was glaring from the onset is that the trade union movement was not considered as an essential service. There was no consideration for the trade unions to continue to give representation at their offices for and on behalf of workers. There was also no consultation with the movement in determining essential and non-essential services. And to us, it was really an implied intent to reduce the effectiveness of workers' representation during this period. And it was really contrary to the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles of Right at Work, and it talked about those things. The regulation and the accompanying restrictions were extended, and it's still on until May the 15th. And at today's date, we still have the same kind of case history that we are seeing now. What were the actions that were taken? One of the immediate fallout was the declaration of non-essential businesses, and they were forced to close, and there was the resultant job loss. We had stay-at-home orders. What was interesting was the Ministry of Labor's announcement of the workplace policy, which included arrangement for pandemic leave. We are still waiting to see that come to realization at this time. In terms of other action taken, we had a salary relief grant that was given by the government for 3 months because they understood that by closing down non-essential businesses, particularly the small business sector, and that is a critical sector which employs thousands of workers, and most of them are in precarious jobs, that those businesses were affected. They gave out some food cards and some minor things, you know, in terms of providing some social relief. But what was critical was that the bureaucracy within the government services was exposed again. And people are still waiting on the rollout of those social services in a fundamental way. We are now seeing people now taking them up, or they are now being distributed. And to me, again, the absence of electronic government platform, a proper and effective platform to speed up the identification and processing of persons that we could have done that through a faster means, was obviously glaring, because there is nothing in place for that, and we were not happy about that. How did that affect workers? Workers were forced to stay home with no clear policy direction. Workers didn't have adequate technological equipment. There was no on-site or in-office union representation, as I said before. They really diminished the shop floor representation. and there was no opportunity to organize and mobilize workers because of the social distancing policy that came into effect. The positive impact on this was that it forced companies and businesses to use more technology to execute job function. There was less exposure to the stress of traffic commute, and people who travel from east to Port of Spain and south to Port of Spain will know it's a 3 and 4 hour drive into Port of Spain before you get to productive work. There was improved health and safety practices in some instances. They were forced to do that. They were forced to have staggered and flexible working hours. And what was then considered to be menial and scum jobs were now discovered to be essential jobs. On the negative side, workers were forced to use technology to execute job functions without adequate training. They were also forced to work at home, simultaneously executing family responsibilities and job function at the same time, with the dangerous potential for stress and mental health fallout. And I heard a professional spoke to that this morning. You have to see a single parent have to see about children while executing the job function at home in an environment that is not set for that. And then there was inadequate technological equipment and facilities. There was no on-site worker and trade union representation. There was a greater exposure to the risks with the virus by having people stay on the job in the essential services. There was an environment of job security, uncertainty. And then there was no tangible, up to now, no tangible recognition and reward system for the newly identified essential workers. And you could see it from the proposal that was placed forward to the sanitation workers of a 1% over 3 years. To me, that is really disrespecting the people who are risking their lives outside there. What is the opportunity for permanent change in policy? I have not seen no great opportunities based on what was put in place. But the work from home policy, if you have mutually agreed policy and procedure guidance, it must not be an imposed thing. It must be agreed where there are RMUs and agreed where there are workers with workers coming. We'll talk about it later. And I believe we could see enhanced OSH guidelines. Then, in terms of the trade union capacity to organize workers, because of the absence of any on-site representation, it limited. And then the restriction for mass gathering, plant meetings, shop floor meetings, shop steward, COSABOs and things, all those things were abandoned. They could not have taken place. And we believe it contravenes some of the ILO conventions that I talk about, of freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining, the right to organize, and the issue of member in good standing, Akins. We talk about that, a member who is not employed anymore in one of those small businesses, who are an individual member in a union, can't pay union dues because they are no longer working. They would have had a matter at the ministry, and then the issue of worker in good standing arises due to a pandemic that forced them out of the job. So we believe something has to be done with respect to that. I just want to look at what is the current environment, and this graph shows how dysfunctional it is. The industrial relations environment, government and business together, and labor is on the side. In terms of the tripartite relationship, you are seeing business, government, and labor. There is some kind of engagement, but government with all these ministries inside there, that big circle in the middle is the government. They are operating like if they are the king. That is their tripartite forum, and it's not a shared thing. So the graph is a representation of the size of the relationship in terms of business and labor having a small share, and civil society is totally left out. They are disconnected from the whole process. And I am saying that what we need to see going forward is a new social order looking like this, where for industrial peace, there must be that circular relationship between labor, government, business, and civil society, all equitable across the table. There's no big brother in this. The only big brother in the middle there is industrial peace. And that is the only way we could see that happening. In terms of some of the fundamentals of the new social order, and I want to use that, I like Ozzy don't like the word new norm, because I think once you say norm, it goes back to what it was. An amended IRA, RSBA, the Companies Act, and the USH Act, the enactment of legislation to make the tripartite process independent and legitimized, reporting to Parliament, resolution of all negotiations, all wages must be brought up to 2019 level. There must be a prices policy with control measures, and there must be a wage policy to reduce the gap between the executive pay and the person who was now considered to be essential. We believe there should be job worksite committees to monitor adherence to these policy procedures, And I talk about that particularly in businesses that there are no RMUs. There should be a workers' committee that could meet with the management when they want to implement policies and procedures. And we believe there should be a greater involvement of civil society at the table of the tripartite process. So in the time allotted, Atkins, I think I try to give a perspective on where we are. I know when we engage in the more interactive discussion, we will talk a little more. But that is where Fighton sit at this time in terms of that particular situation and what we see as the current circumstances that prevail at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Remy. I think that is an excellent way for us to start. There are a few points that I've taken note of. I'm not going to get into them now because we really want to give each panelist an opportunity to speak. But I think that in the way that you've approached the start, where you've actually tried to touch on each of the issues, that was important. So the brain starts to think about these things already. And I think that you've raised, as I've said, you've raised a few issues that I would definitely want to get back to that would form the bulk of our discussion. So our next presenter is Michael Anisette. He's the President General of the Seamen and Waterfront Workers Trade Union. He is also the General Secretary of the National Trade Union Center. He's the General Secretary of the Caribbean Congress of Labor. This is a regional union federation representing over 500,000 members in 33 affiliate unions in 17 Caribbean nations. He's the Vice President of the International Transport Workers Federation for Latin America and the Caribbean. He's a member of the Offshore Task Force International Negotiating Group. Mr. Anisette has been actively involved in the trade union movement for over 35 years and has served on numerous local, national, regional, and international workers' federations unions. At present, Mr. Anisette forms part of the 22-member committee appointed by the Prime Minister to help Trinidad and Tobago chart its way forward in light of the COVID pandemic. So, Comrade Anisette, the floor, as they say, is yours.
Okay, all right. Pleasant evening to my comrades and to you, Comrade Atkins. And again, let me join with Remy in expressing my appreciation for the role of the Cipriani Labour College. It is discussions that I've been articulating in terms of Cipriani being the representative in terms of academia and research for the trade union movement, the poor, the working class, and the disadvantaged. And today, and a lot of other days, and allow me to also say that you're also hosting the Secretariat Office for the Caribbean Congress of Labor, which is a very good venture. Having said that, because Comrade Remy would have touched on a lot of issues, and for purposes of not repeating those issues and them, I would like to just make some fundamental points. One, what this pandemic has done is to expose the vulnerability of our society. It has exposed the vulnerability of the fundamentals of what we call politics in Trinidad and Tobago. What it has done, it has shown that there is a lot of vulnerable people within our society that we have never paid attention to. And therefore, the issue to me is how do we address that as a trade union movement? How do we start the conversation where we'll have a just and better society? How do we start the conversation where communities will now be given ownership and power as opposed to the present system we have in Trinidad and Tobago, where we talk about democracy, and the democracy is defined by you going on vote, and after that 5 years, okay, you don't see the politicians. A democracy that doesn't really have buy-in and empowerment of the general population in terms of decision-making process. So that I am saying that the pandemic, has exposed all those vulnerabilities. And we have a responsibility as the trade union movement, and this conversation, I believe, is a starting point to start to articulate and start a new narrative in the context of the kind of society that we want. We cannot go back after this is finished to the old way of doing business in Trinidad and Tobago. We cannot accept, and I want to contextualize what I'm saying. The Honorable Prime Minister, in his speech on April the 20th, right, spoke about the lack of inclusiveness, collaboration, and partnership. And he said COVID-19 would have unmasked the inequality that exists in the economy and society in general. And when the trade union movement made a statement about the 1%, we were taken to task by every news media, by everybody. But here it is. A pandemic has exposed the very vulnerability that we were talking about as the trade union movement. And the Prime Minister himself admitted that. And you didn't have to wait for a pandemic to understand what is happening, because our society is geared towards a certain group of elitists, political and business and finances and people with money who controls and dictates what happens in our society. So that the pandemic, in my humble view, is a blessing in disguise. The pandemic, in its formation, has now put in the forefront several categories of workers who in the past used to be looked down at. The pandemic has demonstrated that without workers, you cannot have an economy. The pandemic has reinforced the articulation and philosophy of the trade union movement, that you cannot have an economy without having workers. In other words, the market force do not dictate what happens in an economy. And we are seeing, notwithstanding with all the profits that are being made, we are seeing is that the governments all over the world has to now inject funds into the economy to keep the economy going. And the question of market forces, the question of private sector running the economy is something that we have to start to talk about as the trade union movement. It's a conversation that we must have, we must put on the table, because we in the trade union movement, post COVID-19, we'll have to start that kind of conversation. We have to determine what kind of society that we want, what we will do as the trade union, and by extension, workers. And when I say workers, I include unemployed, the underemployed, all right, those elderly, the disadvantaged, the vulnerable. Including everybody in this conversation. And what is our responsibility? Our responsibility as the trade union movement now is to put those facts on the table. Our responsibility is to demonstrate that in this pandemic situation, the government again attempted to wipe out, right, the ability of the trade union movement to represent workers during this critical time in workers' work life, where they have been exposing their lives given what is a pandemic. And our efforts, I want to say our meaning, NATUC efforts, to argue that the trade union movements, where you have RMU in essential industry, must be treated as essential, to allow representatives to go outside there and represent their workers. That was frowned by the government, clearly pointing out that the trade union movement, if we believe that because we are in a committee, NTAC or whatever committee, or the Prime Minister committee, if we believe that is democracy, we are misrepresenting what democracy is. So we are saying in NATUC that the time has come in this pandemic situation, and allow me to take the opportunity to thank all those frontline workers and support workers who would have risked their lives, who would have had to work not knowing if they will go home and carry that disease to the family, who are under stress, and even those, as Comrade Remy say, who are working at home in circumstances that is not work-related, that is stressful mentally and otherwise. These are things that we have to look at, These are things that the trade union, we have to collectively, and I'm making this point, collectively sit down and come up with a trade union agenda. We have to now dictate what we want as the trade union movement on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago. We have to determine the kind of society that we want. We have to articulate, all right, the concerns and the pains at ground zero. Because as I speak to you, and let me assure you that there is no articulation for the pains that is suffering by the vulnerable people. Yes, you give out a little grant, but let us analyze that. The minimum wage is $20, right? The minimum wage is $3,466, but the government grant is $1,005. Let us be serious. Let us be serious in this country. That is a disrespect to any worker. All right, and then they give rent at $2,005. What is the average price of rent for a 2-bedroom house? $3,000. So that the worker will always have to be beholden to the banks and the financial institution. And we are saying in National Trade Union Center that the time has come for us to start to work from the bottom up. And we have to start to empower communities. We have to have the conversation involving capital, and which is social, cultural, human capital. And we are saying that if we are serious about really engaging in an open and fair discussion, that civil society, the opposition too, and academia and everybody must be involved in those discussions in a meaningful way. And we cannot sit down in a committee that I have experienced where people are saying, Honorable Prime Minister, your wish is my command, whatever you say goes. I mean, that is an insult to the trade union movement, because you cannot invite me to a committee and you articulate those kinds of words in a committee. And that will clearly demonstrate what we are up against in the trade union movement in a committee that is skewed towards the business community. Who concerned is to get the work outside there. Who concerned is, hey, we losing money. But in terms of the health and safety of workers, there is less focus as it relates to that. And I will want to end there, and I will want to beseech and implore every worker, every unemployed, all the elders, the time has come for us to make a change. This pandemic has demonstrated the power and the strength of the working class in Trinidad and Tobago and worldwide. And therefore, if we coalesce our collective wisdom, and if we work with our unity and understand that we are really in control of this economy, contrary to what people believe. Because if you have capital and you don't have labor, you don't have an economy. If you produce and you don't have workers who have the money to buy the goods and services, your economy is going to collapse. So that workers and the people must be center of the new society that we have to build because of the pandemic. I will stop there and give my comrade Ozzy an opportunity to articulate his views. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. And again, we're seeing here where the members of the panel are speaking not just to what people are generally accustomed to the trade unions discussing, but I think we're discussing here some fundamental developmental issues for Trinidad. We're doing some analysis which exposes the nature of the economy, the nature of the society that we have. And hopefully at the end of this, we would have at least have some of us thinking a little differently about what is required going forward and what this new normal ought to look like. Okay, so I want to now turn to our third speaker, Ozzy Warwick, who is currently the Chief Education and Research Officer and an Executive Trustee of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. He's the General Secretary of the Joint Trade Union Movement and General Secretary of the Movement for Social Justice. He's an elected member of the Financial Control Committee and Presidential Council of the World Federation of Trade Unions. He's also the Secretary of the Industrial Global Union, Caribbean region, and currently chairs the local organizing committee for the Assembly of Caribbean People. So Ozzy, it is not that you are by any means the end of our discussion, but you're just the third, you're going in one down. So think of it like that. So Ozzy, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Comrade Atkins. And of course, I feel privileged to be on this panel with two very, very experienced trade unionists, Comrade Michael Anisette, General Secretary of NATUC, and of course, Comrade Joseph Remy, President of Phyton. Let me start by thanking the Cipriani College, like my previous comrades, really, and the Elmer Francois Institute for Research and Debate for this particular webinar series with a very provocative title, Workers' Rights Are Not Quarantined. Nothing could be as clear as that very strong but correct statement. I particularly like the fact that it was not phrased as a question, because I see so many seminars and workshops where they pose it as a question. In this instance, I saw that the college chose to pose the phrase as a clear statement, and that gives me great comfort, because it is sending a signal that there should be no doubt about the proposition that workers' rights are not quarantined. Therefore, I see my role here this afternoon really to build arguments that support this very critical proposition. Unfortunately, one would think that such a proposition is a given, but no, it is not. For some people, both employers as well as people who have developed a firm belief in neoliberalism, they believe that workers' rights during this time is indeed quarantined. In fact, they view this as an opportunity to further erode workers' rights. But you see, I have reviewed the Quarantine Act and the Public Health 2019 Novel Coronavirus No. 10 regulations very carefully, and there is no mention in either pieces of legislation that speaks to the suspension of workers' rights, either for those who are listed in the regulation as essential workers and those who are not. None of them, none of these pieces of legislation suspends the rights of workers. Therefore, those rights still stand. There's no legal basis. In terms of the international labor standards also has not been suspended or quarantined. In fact, it is the opposite, whereby the international labor standards actually provide guidance for how we can ensure that workers' rights are respected during this pandemic. Respecting those key provisions, Comrade Atkins and Trinidad and Tobago, respecting key provisions of the international labor standards as it relates to safety and health, working arrangements, protection of workers, non-discrimination, social security, employment protection, all of that is supposed to be guaranteed, and that employers and government must maintain that guarantee during and even after the pandemic. In fact, the international labor standards contain specific guidance for ensuring that decent work in the context of the crisis response include guidance that could be of relevance to the outbreak. The Employment and Decent Work for Peace and Resilience Recommendation 2017, it's known as Recommendation 205, that emphasized that the crisis responses need to ensure respect for all human rights and rule of law, including respect for fundamental principles and rights at work, and of course, for respect for international labor standards. So now let me come to Trinidad and Tobago in terms of national labor, the legislative framework. The rights that are enshrined in the International Relations Act, the OSH, the Minimum Wage Order, the Retrenchment and Severance Benefit Act, the Maternity Act, the Trade Unions Act, etc. Those rights, I wish to repeat, for Trinidad and Tobago, for all workers and also for the employers, those rights have not been suspended. They are still very much in existence, and therefore they have not been quarantined. Rights such as health and safety at the workplace, minimum wage, hours of work, the payment of overtime rates, meal and rest breaks, vacation leave, sick leave, maternity benefits. So therefore, there's no legal basis for the unjust actions being taken by employers, including state bodies and ministries, to violate the rights of workers. You see, in reality, even though there's no legal basis, employers are still violating these rights with impunity. In fact, they're using the pandemic as an excuse to further violate and erode workers' rights. And in the cases where there's a recognized majority union, employers are blatantly violating Section 40, which requires the company to consult and discuss with the recognized majority union before they vary any of the terms and conditions within the collective agreement. And they are not doing that. In fact, they are using the pandemic as an excuse not to even meet and treat with the recognized majority union, in plain violation of the IRA, which, as I stated earlier, has not been quarantined. There are also instances when there is an agreement that have been reached between the union and the company. Companies are blatantly violating the agreement itself, you know. So you would think that whilst we understand that these rights still exist and should still be respected, for some reason, it got into the heads of employers that indeed those rights seem to have been quarantined. There are companies and employers who are varying workers' contracts unilaterally. Now, this is a major issue because you know what happened? A lot of workers actually do not realize that even if you're on a month-to-month contract, it is still a contract. And an employer cannot vary that contract without discussions with you or without consultations with you. So simply these decisions or actions by employers to simply not pay workers or reduce their pay or reduce their hours are all variation of those workers' terms and conditions as contained in their contract. So I think that is something a lot of people take for granted. And I think it's very important that we reiterate that an employer cannot unilaterally vary the terms and conditions of your employment. But here's the other problem: precarious work. You see, precarious work indeed has a long history. And this mode of organizing labor for production of goods and services is not necessarily new, but neoliberalism has intensified and accelerated the patterns of precarious work, which in fact shift the global organization and governance of production and reproduction. Now, the COVID pandemic has revealed the proliferation and prevalence of precarious work in Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, it is a model that has been accelerated right here over the last decade. And a clear example of this has to be the revelation with the amount of employers who have not been paying workers NIS. Now, the truth is that it's not a revelation because it is something that we all knew. We all knew it, you know. But here's what happened. As a society, collectively, as a society, we became convinced that it was socially acceptable once the worker had a job. We have to consider workers in the informal sectors. Was there anything put in place for domestic workers? What about domestic workers? And what about so many workers who are in the informal sector? And there are tens of thousands of workers who are working in precarious work. You know, one of the things we talk about, and my both comrades mentioned the salary relief, so I wouldn't repeat that. But you know, one of the things that that you're not hearing a lot of was supposed to be something called the rental assistance relief, because so many of those same workers in precarious work are really renting. And you know, up to this day, they still don't have the forms for those for that relief. So which means we could find comments very soon that thousands of these workers are going to be on the streets. So they can't find food, and now they are going to be placed on the streets. I want to kind of begin to wind down. Many people have been talking about the new normal, and I always like to go back and remind people where this term came from and what it really meant. The term first arose in after the 2008-2009 crisis. The talk of at that time by both the Europeans and the Americans was all about the new normal. coming out of the 2008-2009 crisis. But if you were to ask anybody, Comrade Atkins, what was the new normal then? People not able to say. But you know what became the new normal? Neoliberalism became the new normal. It actually continued unabated. In fact, what emerged coming out of that is what we call the Trump-Johnson era. The era of Donald Trump and the era of Johnson in the UK, which further entrenched neoliberal policies. But here's what worse. What was this so-called new normal? It was neoliberal policies which had racist and fascist tendencies. That was the beginning. That was what the new normal became, where it was okay to feed your population hate and mistrust against immigrants and against persons of black skin. I'm saying it as it is. What we really should be talking about is really the new social contract. That is what is required after this crisis. You see, after the Second World War, a new social contract emerged. And that new social contract, which emerged out of the Second World War, really saw the emergence of human rights, workers' rights, civil rights, etc. Okay? And these things were achieved because of the epic struggle that followed and that led to a compromise that became a new social contract. So that in this instance, we have this crisis, and we therefore have to begin to discuss what will our new social contract look like? How are we going to live in a new paradigm where there should be greater recognition of workers, the importance of workers' organizations like trade unions, the importance of people's organizations like credit unions? How are we going to reconstruct and rebuild our society so that we can guarantee social security, food security, and health security for all of our people? So I would like to end by saying, more than the fact that workers' rights are not quarantined coming out of this pandemic, what really one needs to see is an expansion and a deepening, consolidation, and strengthening of workers' rights in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much, Comrade Atkins and Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much, Ozzy. Well, I think that I could speak comfortably and say that we've chosen our panel very well. Now there are lots of things that have been raised, and I also want to give an opportunity to those persons who are viewing the stream, because we do in fact have some questions that have come in. So I wanna refer to some of them in a bit. But one of the things that has come up, and I want us to spend a few minutes, if we could, on this, really has to do with what is the contradiction? What is the thing that is being tested in this current COVID situation? And the reason I ask that is because a lot of people are focusing on challenges to the economy, right? So there are challenges to the economy. And if that is the case, then what's going to happen? And I think Ozzy alluded to it, Comrade Remy, Comrade Annie said, if we think that the challenge is the economy and that has been affected, then we're going to try to fix the economy. But is it really that the economy has been challenged, or is it that we've challenged the very fundamental basis of the kind of society that we have, where the economy is just a subset of that? Because it is interesting that across the globe, it's not just Trinidad and Tobago, but across the globe, it's the same kind of workers who are affected. Across the globe, it's the same kinds of communities that are affected negatively and economically. Then it speaks to the kind of societies that we have allowed to develop. And I think it speaks to Ozzy's point about what are the ideological drivers for contemporary society. And so does it mean that in the current environment, perhaps we need to expand the discussion, and it is not about fixing the economy, because if we could fix the economy to the point where it works even better than it did before. But if it works better than it did before, that doesn't mean that it's going to work in the interest of workers. And I think that that is something that we have to think about very carefully, about where we point and put our efforts, so to speak. So I want to pose to the panel: do we think that we are having the correct discussion nationally about where we ought to be intervening? Are we speaking to the correct things at this point? So we've set up this committee to look at the economy and have a new roadmap. So is that, do you think that committee is addressing the correct things? Do you think, based on what we've all said here, the challenges that we've all identified, is the scope of this committee, in fact, the kind of discussion that we ought to be having at this point in time? And we can answer, I suppose, in the same order that we went, or comrades can unmute their mic accordingly.
Right. Yeah, Comrade Atkins, and I am happy that you touch on that. You know what always baffles me, and this time around it was very glaring, is that we are trying to fix a free market system with social policies, and it's a short, quick fix. You know, all of a sudden we're hearing about solidarity and let us do this together and let us work together. But that is totally contradictory to the type of political system that we practice. And you're right, we could fix the economy, but the social injustices would still be there. And Ozzy was right, we can't go back to our normal, because normalcy to them means that we will continue to oppress people and continue to keep people in poverty and continue to keep workers exploited and in precarious jobs. And that is why I agree. We need to have a new social order, or as you say, a new social contract. We're speaking about fundamentally transforming the political system that will now give rise to a different kind of economic system. And you're right, we could fix the economy tomorrow. And you'll hear all these economists, they always speak to the issue of development, and they always do it in terms of econometrics. So they measure human being satisfaction from a mathematical perspective, and they put those things outside there. And I always use a term, I told Ozzy that, and I got it from a book. It's the econocracy. It's about those economists who believe they alone have the solutions, and they talk in a language to keep other people out of their discourse. And it is deliberately done that way. And that is what I say. The college is at the hub of bringing about a different discussion, and I'm glad discussion has started. This is what we need now. We could fix the economy tomorrow. The social injustices will still be there because the political system is still ravaged by this whole neoliberal and free market system, that they are now trying to use short-term social quick fixes to bring it back in order and then go back to the normal. That is why they say the new normal, back to the old plantation economy and exploit people, extract all the things from the society and push it outside. That is my response at this time.
Okay, just let me add my 2 cents. And I want to start off by saying that inequality has an inherent and an important social significance. Because what it does is to expose certain realities. And as I've said, that the pandemic has clearly exposed those fundamental vulnerabilities within our society. And while I hear my comments about social contract, I don't think that a social contract will allow for the kind of redress that is necessary to take the society to another level where the dignity and respect of the man on the street, the dignity and respect of human beings, regardless of gender, race, etc., is respected by everybody. You see, we are involved in a politics that I will call politics of Wonderland. We are involved in this syndrome where you have to be dependent on the government for a UP job, a URP, or a CPEP. You have to depend on the government to get a house. And it is used as a political tool against all right, people, if you don't vote or if you don't belong to this particular party or this particular race. Wherein, if we're talking about fundamental human rights, the rights to free education, the right to good health, the right to a house, the right to own a living, the right to share in the patrimony of our economy, the right to participate in the commanding height of our economy. Those are fundamental human rights that we appear to forget because we allow a political system, all right, to be imposed on us that never took into consideration our history and our culture as a people. It was a political system that was imported from foreign, lock, stock, and barrel. And I am saying that if we want to make the changes that we are talking about, we have to have the broad-based discussions. We have to speak truth to power. We have to get other people, social actors, involved in this discussion. The 22-man team is not a true reflection of who we are and what we are in this country. And therefore, I will predict with the best will we're going to fail until we understand that a society, right, is built by people and not by politicians. Until we understand that and until we inculcate that kind of thinking in the minds of the citizens, until we use this pandemic to demonstrate the power and the strength of workers, right? Because as you correctly say, there's a fear outside there, all over the world, because the strength of workers are being demonstrated in a tangible way. The importance of workers are being demonstrated in a tangible way. The fact that the neoliberal concept, the concept of market forces solve any problem has proven to be a lie. The concept that private sector is the be-all to all the problems, right, in any country or globally has proven to be a lie. But more importantly, what this has demonstrated, that all the funding to get the economies running, all right, is funded by the government. And all the business people are more concerned about getting the economy running as opposed to ensuring that the health of the workers and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago takes precedence before profits. And I'm saying, from a NATU perspective, that is what we have to grapple with. That is what we have to deal with. And I am confident. You understand? Because in every society, and I could go on what happened in Trinidad in the 1990s, the 1937, the 1970s, all right, and more. There was some fundamental changes, right, that came about. And therefore, we have to use this blessing in disguise, the pandemic, to bring about the fundamental changes that is necessary, where people are put first. I want to make that point in them, where people are put first, because I am saying, if you allow a certain group of people to command the commanding height of the society, if we allow finances, if we allow people that have money, which I call the business elite, I want to repeat it, and the political elite, to run Russia, to wrong us, well, then we cannot have any solutions. We have to understand now that is a new dispensation we want, a new society where people are put before profits. And that is the only way we're going to get, because no social contract going to change what is happening where 1% and a group of people control the economy. No social contract going to do that. We have to, it come like an old house. If you have an old house, you don't go and build a new house over the old house. You mash down the old house and you start from scratch from the foundation up. And as I said, and I will leave that thought for the listening public, I have never seen a house built from on top. You always start a house from the foundation, and there's a reason for that. And we, the workers, we, the vulnerable, the single parent, the elders, we are the foundations of any society. We the working class, and therefore the new society have to start from the foundation up. Thank you.
Yeah, Akins, I think you would have raised a really deep question. What is being challenged? The virus is challenging neoliberal capitalism. I mean, I'm not sure we could jump high, we could jump low, we could try to hide from it as much as we can. That is what is being challenged. And let me give you a very practical example of what I mean. We as human beings are going to have to make a choice, and a real deep choice, about what will be the structure of the social and political and economic relations that is required for human existence. I remember when at that time the numbers in the United States was going up, I mean, at exponential rate. And I paid particular attention to the stock market. That particular day, or the day before, the United States had something like almost 1,800 deaths. These are human beings who died the day before. So I decided, let me see how the market is going to respond to this. But it was the same day in which Donald Trump announced the relief packages to the Congress. Do you know what the market said the very next day? After 1,800 people died in one day, the market showed a marked increase, responding positively to the fact that there was going to be a $2 trillion bailout package, and ignored the fact that 1,800 people in the United States had died the day before. It is the irrationality of neoliberal capitalism that is coming to the fore. When you consider the fact that the market-driven economy really has failed, and the United States is a very good example, and I'm using them because look where they end up. They have ended up at the center of the pandemic. You would have seen, and I mean, I could not even believe it, because we are talking about human beings, where states were competing with each other to get ventilators and other life-saving medical supply. I want that to sink into people's consciousness, that at a time when hundreds and thousands of people were dying every day, the inherent irrationality of that capitalist system had states competing, not in solidarity with each other, not coordinating, not coming together, not cooperating, but competing to get life-saving medical supply. And then now let's talk about the global supply chain for food. We have built our neoliberal capitalism around the idea that, listen, you comparative advantage, so that you need to import most of your food items. The idea of food sovereignty or food security, they said that those ideas are socialist and should not be considered at all. So here's a situation where humanity is on the brink of hunger, right here in Trinidad and Tobago. And if you think that I am making an abstract statement, then look at every day when you hear about somebody doing a hamper drive. That is symptomatic of something far deeper. And I mean, I can give Akins, my fellow comrades, so many examples, but I will not. That is how, to say quite frankly, Akins, that question you asked there requires a 5-part series, because we need to really go deep and analyze and understand what was this capitalist system that we built that became the, especially after 1989, that became the only form of human structure, the only form of human organization to fulfill human existence. And I think that is at the heart of it. So when you ask, that's a real powerful question. What is being challenged? Simple. Neoliberal capitalism is being challenged. And what is going to happen is capital is going to try to find a way to come out of this crisis, as they have done so in 29, as they have done so after World War II, as they have done so after 2008, and after crisis. And you notice that the crisis in terms of rates are coming, and they're coming faster and faster. And I think that is really the question we're gonna have to ask. Does neoliberal capitalism really the model of human organization that will ensure the sustainability of our species, and to help see that all members of our species can at least live a life that is fulfilling? I think that is what is being challenged. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the responses, comrades. Because you see, the reason I asked that question is that we could get tied down or bogged down in responding to fires without addressing the root cause. And we can look at this as an economic challenge, or we can look at it as a social challenge and a societal challenge. Now, as Ozzy said, this conversation here and that question could lead us into the 5-part series starting now, and we could go until the end of the week. But what I want to do now is I want to give an opportunity for two things. One, I want to ask our panel now and commit you to perhaps joining us again at some time next week, early in the week, so that we can continue the discussion, because I don't think we can get everything done now. But also I want us to give an opportunity to some of the questions that have been coming in from persons who are viewing us on YouTube. I think we're just over 120 or 130 viewers at this time. So I want to just give them an opportunity to get involved. So one of the first questions that we have, I think it ties in very nicely to what we were discussing about how the economy works. And that is, how is the trade union movement, or what is the view of the trade union movement on the way that small and micro businesses ought to approach the question of employment in this period? Because a micro or small enterprise is not necessarily in the same financial position as a conglomerate. So how do they deal with this question of maintaining salaries and maintaining workers' level of sustainability and their ability to take care of their families and so on in this environment? Right. So what would you suggest as a way for the smaller enterprises to deal with this pandemic and this current scenario?
Comrade, that is a very difficult question to answer, because I am feeling it for the small businesses. You know, I live in a community where I have seen two shocks that would have impacted negatively on small businesses. One is the still confusing and, to me, illegitimately close off the Petrotrin refinery. I live in Gasperlo, which is one of the fence line communities to Petrotrin, and I have seen the impact on the small business sector by the closure of the refinery. And while they were now recuperating, they have now to face this pandemic. The challenge they are having is that they are not in a position, as you say, to have reserves that they could rely on. And I think one of the things small businesses have to do now, they have to depend on government support. There is no other way out. And I think they are the ones should be getting the liquidity support from the government. And there should have been a fund that should have been set up. Two funds, I believe. One is to provide support to these small businesses in times like these. And two, to take care of the employees through an unemployment kind of insurance situation, which we have been articulating for quite a while, so that the employer would not, particularly in these small businesses, would not have to be bogged down with worrying about paying employees' salaries immediately. in the interim when we try to navigate ourselves out of this pandemic. So to me, their only solution now is to seek out assistance from the government and then restructure themselves in such a way that they could contribute in addition to having it invested in this fund that will allow them to build that kind of reserve capacity as a small business. And there should be some requirement by those small business developmental foundation and funds that inherent in the accounting system should be a reserve requirement to take care of circumstances like this, because they are going to find themselves in a similar situation. I'm saying that because of what I know exists in the credit union movement. Every credit union by law must put aside 10% of their surplus requirement every year towards a reserve fund before they do the distribution of surplus to their members. And I think we could start to pattern some of those inherent built-in support systems that are there in the cooperative business model into the other business model so that they could have sustainability during this period. That is my take on it at this time.
Thanks, comrade. Anybody chime in?
Yeah.
Comrade, you just muted your mic.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Because you see, when you look at the amount of small and medium-sized business that drives the economy, it begs the question why it is a comprehensive analysis wasn't done so we could have gotten the data that is necessary. So the required assistance could have gone to where it is needed. And I think that is lacking in Trinidad and Tobago. Because when we take our decisions at governmental level, it's not data-driven. It's not evidence-based. And therefore, as the comrade is rightly saying, the small and medium-sized business people, they are hurting more than anybody. And again, it brings me back to the question that I continue to ask. We have to concentrate on the most vulnerable, people within the society. And the small and medium-sized business, they are vulnerable. The banks, I mean, when I look at the declaration of the profit from Republic Bank today, I mean, it's amazing. All right. And therefore, it brings me back to champion a concept, which is cooperative banking, which is small and medium-sized business must understand and which we must start to target, because the evidence outside there is in times of recession and in times of depression and in times of these kinds of particular situations, because of the concept of the cooperative and what cooperative banking is, that the cooperative banking stands more resilient than all those big so-called PG Morgan and Wells Fargo banks and all these banks. All right. And therefore, the conversation that I am always talking about, community first, community development have to start. And it could start from us looking at cooperative banking, right, for these groups of people, as opposed to the normal banking who puts things on a moratorium and you still have to pay it and they still taxing you, etc., etc. Again, the question of a new model of society from the foundation up has to be right in the conversation, and we must start that conversation now. And again, I want to thank you all for the opportunity of starting this conversation, and I'm confirming my availability for next week in advance.
Ozzy.
Yes, thanks, Akis. And I believe both Comrade Remy and Comrade Annie said, I think, would have, very comprehensively answered that question. But when you ask it, something jumped into my head. So please forgive me, and I really hope that the listening audience could bear with me a little bit. When you ask how can small businesses cope? How are they going to survive? But you know what ran through my mind? Virgin Atlantic. Now, I know you're asking, well, why would Virgin Atlantic run through your mind? Because it further builds on the premise that I put forward earlier. Here is a company that was celebrated and praised for being really a very good example of capitalism working. Uber, same. Amazon, same. Yet, after just a month and a half of a crisis like this, Virgin Atlantic is saying that they're going to go bankrupt if they don't get help from the state. So all these years and all that profit, and I just double checked, $38 billion or billion pounds in assets. That is Virgin Atlantic. Uber, $31.2 billion in assets. Amazon, $225 billion in assets. Uber is going to be sending home thousands of workers. They haven't said from which countries. Amazon already cutting staff. At Virgin Atlantic, they said they're going bankrupt. In Trinidad and Tobago, we already saw what Prestige Holdings, after right after declaring how much profit they made, just right after that, they started to talk about cutting staff. And so many of those retail giants right here in Trinidad and Tobago send home their workers, not even paying them anything. In fact, those retail giants in Trinidad and Tobago now, telling the workers that they will help them, guess what? Fill out salary relief forms. Now, it begs the question, what that will mean for a small business. You follow? And I agree with Comrade Remy that really and truly any support for business has to go towards these small businesses. These big guys, and they have proven the point that I was making. And that's why I continue to say that this is challenging neoliberal capitalism. It is irrational that you can have companies that declare so much profit. After a month and a half of people staying home, they start to scratch their head, they have to file for bankruptcy, and so on. Now, you might be surprised that coming out of this, that the companies that will actually file for bankruptcy coming out of this are not going to be those small businesses. Those small businesses will still try their best, especially those businesses grounded in communities. You will be shocked to see how they will try their best to get another extra loan if it's not from the credit union and so on, to keep the little business going. But yes, watch and see who will be the businesses that are going to be starting to declare bankruptcy. I assure you, it's going to be big business in Trinidad and Tobago. So I just wanted to put that back on the table for further analysis. Oh, sorry, thank you. Oh.
That's right. Yeah, Ozzy, and the point that you make there is interesting, because the irony of it is that these same companies that are crying and bawling and so on after just 1 month are asking employees, why don't you have a reserve to cushion you for this month that you're at home? And that is the irony of it. And I'll tell you that I've actually had a conversation with someone who said their landlord put that to them, that they want the rent because you must have a saving somewhere. Okay? And these are the kind of conversations so the expectations in a financially difficult period are lower for a big business than it is for the small man on the street. And that is the reality of the condition. And therefore, that's why I was saying earlier that the issue is not economics. It's not an economic thing. It is about how we see people. Because those questions are not economic, they're not sensible economic questions. To ask an individual who works minimum wage to go for 6 weeks or 8 weeks without a salary, while the company that employs them is saying that they cannot manage for 1 month without making a profit. Something is fundamentally wrong there, and the economics and the math is not adding up in my view. But so we have some other questions here, and I want to tie about 3 of them together, and it has to do with the stay-home orders. So the stay-home orders have produced some interesting dynamics where some companies have in fact used that to circumvent, as you said, RMUs. But imagine those companies that don't have RMUs and those workers who have been sent home without letters, without an indication of what kind of what's the situation. One person said the employer said, not to paraphrase, hard luck there, I'll call you when they tell us we could reopen. What is the plan? And we have the three federations here. How do you all and your organizations plan to assist these non-unionized workers? Because your members will come to you and your members have access to you. How do you plan to assist these non-unionized workers in this difficult challenge? Because if, as you said, Ozzy, where RMUs existed, the companies created IROs. Where RMUs existed, could you imagine what has happened to workers where there's no union, where there's no RMU? So what is the role of the trade union movement, and what representation are they going to make on behalf of those workers who are not unionized in this period?
Comrade Atkins, let me say from the onset, and this is something that has been bugging me for quite a while since the stay-at-home orders have been announced. And one of the things I want to do first is to say that we are not happy with the fact that we had a workplace policy that was discussed at the NTAC, which would have given some policy guidelines. It would have been geared specifically towards the public sector, but it would have also allowed some kind of guidance for the areas where there are no RMUs. What I would want to see and what I would suggest to the other federations, and I think all trade unions, and I want to take the invitation from Comrade Anisette on board. He said that the labor movement need to meet and have a perspective on this. And I think we need to meet ASAP, as urgent as we can, because there are a lot of workers, the unorganized workers, and what has happened is by the suspension of the workers, the trade unions' right to organize and engage in the freedom of association, we are being debarred from organizing those unorganized workers at this time. The unions who represent individual members are now hamstrung. I raised the issue of workers not in good standing. We have to say to the government and to the Ministry of Labor that they have to find legal means to lax the laws to allow those workers to continue to have representation so that their trade disputes can be brought properly before the Ministry of Labor and before the court. It is going to be absolutely unfair and obscene to say to a worker that because you missed 3 months because you were laid off because of a pandemic, that you are not a worker in good standing anymore. And I think that is something that has to be addressed quickly from the legislative perspective. And I think the trade union federations and all trade unions should immediately lobby to see that we could bring that kind of legislative relief in the short term. And then we have to look at how do we organize the unorganized workers. I think it's time that we engage in that campaign. Too much of workers are outside there without trade union representation. We have to change the way we do education, and we have to utilize the technology to reach out to the different kind of workers on the job site. So that is my take on it at this time, and I will defer to the other comments to have their response.
You may recall that the NTAC meeting, we would have been discussing prioritizing the whole question of unemployment insurance. And the trade union was very vociferous as it relates to that particular issue. Because what we have discovered, all right, is that when it comes to workers' rights, the speed of getting the legislation passed, is disturbing and regrettable. And as you rightly say, the work program that we sat down and discussed at NTAC, the issue of the pandemic leave that was raised by the minister on TV with the acting CPO, today that has been ratified by the very cabinet. But if you look at the haste that they would have passed certain laws, All right. And then if you look at the deafening silence too of the opposition as it relates to those fundamental issues that affect workers, it begs the question as to the role of the trade union movement now, which is to rise above, all right, the water and really go outside there and be a force of good on behalf of these workers. We can do it because we are aware that several workers have been calling the federation. I am almost certain that they have called all the other federations for guidance and assistance. The issue is how we collate those workers and them to get a feel of all the issues so that we can go at NTAC and other forums, even at the forum that I am on, the 22-man committee, to raise those issues and demand that those vulnerable people be taken care of before we do anything. And I think that if we do that, if we start to raise our voices, if we start to use these kinds of discussion, the social media and all the other avenues in terms of modern technology, in terms of how we can communicate, we have to be like, as they say, in the government face, in the opposition face, in the business people face, right? We have to say enough is enough. And we would not, as federations and as the labor movement, accept that kind of behavior to our workers in Trinidad and Tobago. That is the only way, you know. Because regardless of what people say, is the trade union movement will have to speak for on behalf of the disadvantaged, the poor, the pensioners. Nobody else will speak for you until it's election time. And that's about shaking hands and making promises. And when the election finished, they forget about you and they go on back shaking the brandy and the wine glasses and laughing ho, 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 until the next 5 years come. And we have to start to be brutally frank on those issues. We have to start to raise it in the public domain. We have to start to do it. Like from yesterday, Cipriani Labour College have a role to play in that too. Right? We have to do the research. We have to get the data. We have to open some format, and I need guidance because there are so many different platforms where the labor movement, as a labor movement, open a forum where any worker who is affected, unionized or non-unionized, can now log into this, put your issues on them so that we could start to articulate them right in the public domain. That is the approach that I see. That is the only approach, in my humble view, that will make sense. That is the approach, in my humble view, that will resonate and encourage the unemployed, all right, the underemployed, all right, the minimum wage workers to come together and to understand that your salvation is not within the political parties, but with the trade union movement and the labor movement. That is where we have to go. Let us use the technology to get the information, set up a line, whatever it is. Let us talk to our IT experts so that these workers and them can log in and put their grievances and we can make representation. We could come together, right, and dedicate several leaders and them and several of our officers whose responsibility and tasks will be to address those specific issues. We could do it. We have the capabilities, we have the ability. So let us do it. That is my view. Thank you.
I'll be short because I really think that Comrade Remy and Comrade Annie said they said everything there is to say about this. I think definitely, comrades, we should quickly and very, very quickly put our heads together. So because this actually could be a really incredible opportunity for the trade union movement to be strengthened. So I there's very little else for me to say other than the name of your institute, the name of the institute that is hosting this particular seminar, Elmer Francois. I draw on that name because that is where we have to go back to the days of Elmer Francois, where we were a labor movement, not trade unions, but labor movement. Because with the introduction of the ISA and then the IRA, where they brought in these terms of recognized majority union and bargaining units and workers in good standing, really what that did is that it created a sort of divide amongst the working class. I think all three of us are prepared to shed that and go back to our roots of a labor movement where we represented the unemployed, we represented women, we represented young people. Join, become a member of a movement that can represent your interests, like how you had the Working Men's Association, like how you had the Negro Welfare Association, you had the Trinidad Citizens League. You know, these types of working class institutions that really became the bedrock for our political history, our social history. So I think now is out of crisis, all sorts of things can emerge. I think Comrade Anisette would have said it earlier. And I think going back to the days of Elmer Francois, there are others, but I'm using that name specifically because it's the name of the institute that is hosting this particular series. So that's basically all. I think Comrade Remy and Comrade Anisette have said all that there is to say on this, and I concur with them both on it.
So what I wanted to say is we have a few minutes left, and this really is not so much about, yes, the college is facilitating, but it's really about demonstrating to the public that the trade union movement is more than just wages and salaries. They're more than just about the collective bargaining process, you know, and that there's a lot more on the table, and that the unions think about workers, not just where they work, but where they live. And we think about things like community and all of these issues were raised here this afternoon. I really want to commend the panelists for, I think, and even in the discussions from those who were online viewing, all the comments were excellent. People were really happy about what they were hearing, and that is fantastic. So I want to ask that we have committed here. Let me put you all on the spot because I think everybody has agreed. So how soon can we get from the movement a clearly articulated campaign for how we bring non-unionized workers into the loop? Because one of the things that is happening is that a lot of these workers, one question, for example, which is was, can workers be retrenched without severance benefit? Could they just be sent home and ignore the act or the law? And I think Ozzy raised that early on, that the obvious answer is no, that law and proper procedures still has to be followed, even in this environment. But I think that a number of employers took advantage of the situation, and workers started to be sent home upon the announcement of the initial lockdown, which is odd, because you should at least have budgeted for that month to pay your workers. So could you send them home almost immediately upon the announcement? So something doesn't sit right with that. So I wanna thank again our panelists. I wanna thank everyone who is viewing and listening to us. Next week, we've agreed that we'll come back. So perhaps we can determine that maybe Monday or Tuesday. I will reach out to you all and we'll determine whether we're going to do this on Monday or Tuesday. But also, I want to also say now that we're having our next panel will be a regional panel. So we're going to have Sister Claudette from C47 in out of Suriname. We're going to have Sandra Messiah from PSI Caribbean out of Barbados, and Comrade Andre Lewis, president of the Caribbean Congress of Labour. And that's our regional panel as we try to understand how the region is dealing with it as well, because quite apart from us having this solidarity discussion here with our local federation, there's need for a much broader regional discussion on this same developmental question, how we respond collectively as a region, because it could be very easy for us to come out on the other side of this pandemic with a prettier society, but not necessarily a more just society. So you can patch things up and make it look a little prettier. So we'd now all be online. We'd all be using more technology. But have we resolved the fundamental inequities within the society? And that is a real question that I think we have to ask when we approach this question of fixing the problems facing us. Because I'm not entirely sure that we're committed to fixing either the inequities or the relations of people within the society and the disenfranchisement of large sectors of the society, whether it be women, children, elderly, because we're very comfortable. It would seem that the disease initially was attacking elders and the elderly were most vulnerable. It almost seemed as if we were comfortable with that, you know? So those are the kinds of things that we really have to begin to address as a society. And again, I want to thank all of our panelists for being with us. I want to thank those who were viewing. I want to thank the Elmer Francois team who's behind the scenes doing their work as well, and our IT support. Thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you all again soon.
Thanks so much, comrade, and it was a pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel.
Yeah, same on
Thank
this
you.
side.
Yeah. Thank you, comrades, as we go forward ever and backward never. Thank you, comrades.
Okay.
Yeah, all the best.
All the best.